Good morning, everyone. I want to welcome you to this Tuesday's edition of the TNT Devotionals. My name is Matt. I have the privilege and the honor to be one of the student pastors at our Friendswood campus. It's such an honor to be on staff and a part of this church and all that God is doing. And we've got some exciting things coming up. And I hope that if you didn't get a chance, that you could go back and watch this past weekend's service where Pastor Tim kind of got to give us a little taste of what is to come and let us know in on some of the things that are happening in the life of our church now that we've kind of made the progress on being debt free. And it's like, well, what's next? And we've sought wise counsel, and it's like, here's where we feel we need to go and where God is leading us. And so Pastor Tim got to outline a lot of that this past weekend. So hopefully you got to see that and are excited about that. If you've missed out on some of that, you can go to our YouTube channel or go to our website or Facebook, and you can get some more information there. Go back and watch that service, a great intro into where our church is heading, because we got some exciting things going on. So one thing that I love is a good story or a good book. And if you would right now, in the chat, just let us know what your favorite story or book is that is not the Bible or a book in the Bible, because, you know, I know all the wonderful people watching the TNT devotionals, the TNT people rock and would all just put the Bible as the first thing in the chat. But let us know what your favorite story or book is. Maybe it's a book you read as a kid that taught you a story or a lesson. One that comes to my mind is the book called like Rainbow Fish that taught you kind of how to share. And that was something that like my mom always read to me when I was a kid. And so put in the chat one of your favorite books or stories or something, maybe something that has taught you something. It could be a how-to book, I guess, if that is, I guess, how you think. But let us know a book or story that has taught you something. I think it's always interesting about these TNT devotionals. We've got people from all walks of life, from all over the country, who are all kind of tuning in to hear a devotional in the morning time, or if you're watching back, getting to kind of get into the Word a little bit together. So I know everyone's favorite book is really the Bible, but let us know something maybe that you've learned or have a book or story that has taught you something. So you could also think maybe for a second, a story that someone told you, or maybe that was a grandparent or a parent. They taught you a story, they told you a story. I think that you can even think of stories that you have shared with people, maybe a bedtime story you told your kids. I think it's so funny how parents, when they're telling stories to their kids, they're able to just come up with the wildest things. I have friends who tell me all the time that they are able to just suddenly magically make up stories on the spot. They've never been good storytellers, but when it means it will help the kid go to sleep, that they are somehow a mastermind at being able to tell stories. So think about that. Think about stories that you've heard or stories that you've shared. And a book that I have personally been enjoying reading is a book called 1 in 1,000. I would have brought it with me, but I left it on my countertop this morning. So it's a book called 1 in 1,000, and this story, it really means a lot to me. It's actually a kid's book, and it's a story of a boy who has club feet, which affects about every 1 in 1,000 kids, is where the title of the book comes from, 1 in 1,000. And my son, who is going to be born here in a few months, in June, has club feet. And I say has club feet because he is very much alive and very much has feet that are not normal. They're turned inward, and can't wait for him to be on this side where I can hold him and do all the things that dads get to do with their kids. Really looking forward to that. But this story, it really means a lot to me because the boy's name in the book is Jojo. And what do you know? That the name of my son is Josiah. And I often refer to him as little Jojo. And so I find this book and I read it, and seeing his name be Jojo in the story and having club feet is really special to me. So I've been able to really enjoy spending time looking and reading at the book. And it's literally a kid's book, but I love to read it and look at it because it's a story about Jojo, who has club feet. And he's really upset because he can't quite do the things that other kids do. He can't climb the trees, he can't run, he can't do some of these things because of his feet. He then goes to the doctor and he gets some magic shoes that he wears at night. So a very common thing for people, kids with club feet, is they sleep and spend countless hours throughout the day in special boots that will help correct their feet and straighten them out. The magic shoes that he wears at night when he sleeps, they kind of let him go on these big, grand adventures while he dreams. And so for about 5 years, it says that he wears these shoes, which is kind of normal for kids with club feet. They wear them for a number of years. He then is able to, after wearing those shoes every night, he's able to run and jump and climb trees just like everyone else. And at the end of the book, he gives his shoes to another one in 1,000, a little girl. And he does that so that she can experience the same adventures that Jojo did, and that her feet can one day be fixed. And it's a really cool story that I think is incredibly touching, I think, for me personally, reading that. And it teaches, about not just sharing, but looking out for others. It talking about and teaches the lessons, I think, of that no matter how you're made, that you're special and that you matter and are important, even if you don't quite look like everyone else. So it's a really, really great book. And I would say behind every book, behind every story, that there's meaning. And Jesus often uses stories to illustrate a point. And these are called parables. And Jesus used them a lot. In fact, we are going to be talking about Jesus' parables for a good bit throughout the summer and even beyond that, because he used them that often. And I'm excited as we look at the stories he told, and hopefully last week you got to hear from Pastor Jeremy. He kind of introed us into parables, and actually Pastor Tim introed us into parables as well, as we learned this past weekend about the parable of the lost sheep. And as we learned about parables, that we can understand parables to be earthly stories with heavenly meanings. And Jesus would often use a simple picture or simple story to illustrate a heavenly meaning, that you don't take a parable at face value, you don't take a parable literally. It is a story, an earthly story, that is meant to tell a heavenly meaning. And these stories, they don't just like touch our brains and our intellect, as Pastor Jeremy talked about last week, but they also affect our hearts. And that then changes the way that we live. So life change, right, is the goal. So this week, we're in Mark chapter 4, and you can go ahead and turn there in your Bible. I've got the NIV here is where I'll be reading from. So Mark chapter 4, and while you're turning there, I want to give a quick shout out to the weather. Not today or this morning because it's cold and rainy, but it feels like the past few weeks we have turned the corner from just a month or so ago it being freezing to now. It has, for the most part, been very warm and sunny and very much feels like spring. Not today, though. Of course, this morning, sorry, but it is nice and cold and rainy, so if you haven't been outside, be dressed up for that. So it's springtime. And the rain is good because it brings, nourishment to the flowers, because you see that the flowers have been able to bloom, and they're blooming in the garden in our backyard, is actually starting to produce our vegetables that we planted. It feels like forever ago. And growing up, didn't really like vegetables, but I'd say one particular vegetable I didn't like was Brussels sprouts. I feel like the past 5 years or so, Brussels sprouts is like on a resurgence of popularity. It's getting back to being popular. It used to be the go-to disgusting example of what a vegetable is, but now I feel like everyone loves them, because if you think about it, like, kids don't like Brussels sprouts generally. They maybe like carrots or potatoes or green beans, maybe peas, but definitely not Brussels sprouts, because those are gross. But I think now I would say that Brussels sprouts is actually one of my favorite vegetables. I've made a lot of progress. I went from saying that my favorite vegetable is a French fry, which is technically a potato, to now eating Brussels sprouts all the time. I'll pretty much eat any vegetable. I actually had beets the other day. Not there yet, so I'm not quite there in my sanctification process, but come a long way, and I think that's probably what being married to a vegetarian will do to you, is that you just learn to like vegetables. And so I've kind of been like pigeonholed into liking vegetables. If she's going to make dinner, then vegetables are going to be a part of it because she's a vegetarian. So I better learn to like vegetables or I'm not going to get to eat. So that's just kind of the way it works. So I've come a long way. And I say that, and the reason for all the veggie talk is because today's parable, this week's parable, right, is about a farmer who is sowing seeds. So in Mark chapter 4, we see this story. And you can find this story. It's the parable of the soils, or the parable of the sower. You can find it in all the synoptic gospels. That's Matthew, Mark, and Luke. It's, in fact, one of only 3 parables in those 3 gospels. That's in every single one of those synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And I'm going to read the one from Mark this morning, which is also where Jeremy last week introduced us to Jesus, who often taught in parables. That verse comes from Mark chapter 4. So let's read it all at once, and then we'll break it down by sections. So let's go ahead and do that. It says, again, this is verse 1. Again, Jesus began to teach by the lake, and the crowd that gathered around him was so large that he got into a boat, sat down in it, and while all the people were around the shore at the water's edge, he began to teach them. He taught them many things by parables, and in his teaching said, listen, a farmer went out to sow his seed, and as he was scattering the seed, some fell on the path, and the birds came up and ate it. Some fell on the rocky places where it did not have much soil, and it sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow. But when the sun came up, the plants were scorched, and they withered because they had no root. Other seed fell among the thorns, which grew up and choked the plants. And so they did not bear any grain. Still, other seed fell on good soil. It came up, grew, and it produced a crop, some multiplying 30, some 60, some 100 times. Then Jesus said, whoever has ears to hear, let him hear. So there's kind of a lot here. So we're going to try to unpack this the best that we can in the time that we have. And so just some context, right? It says, again, Jesus began to teach by the lake. So likely here is the Sea of Galilee. And if you were to ever look at a map of the Sea of Galilee, which is on the north side of the country where Jesus was, just on the north side of the lake, if you went southwest, a lot of directions here, north side of the lake, or the Sea of Galilee, southwest of Capernaum, which is a town you've probably heard of that Jesus taught at. On the southwest side of Capernaum, there was a part of the Sea of Galilee. It's a cove, really, so it's kind of goes along the coast, and then it goes in, and then comes back out. And you can actually look at this. It's often called the Cove of the Sower, because it's likely believed that this is where Jesus taught this parable. We also know that Jesus probably taught this parable many times, but in this particular instance that's referenced, that Jesus probably taught it here at the Cove of the Sower. And so if you were even able to kind of look at a map, like if you were to go to Google and just Google image search Cove of the Sower, you would be able to see exactly where that is. And it makes a whole lot of sense with what is described here, that it got so crowded he had to get in a boat. And so he's in now a boat inside the cove. And there's almost like a natural amphitheater that's built into the way that the hillside is. And there's beautiful crops and a lot of land there. It's actually really neat. And there's a road that goes there. So this Cove of the Sower makes a lot of sense for where Jesus was probably teaching this. And the people who were there listening to Jesus speak and teach, they likely are very, very, very familiar with the language he's using. So this is not just some, man, Jesus, you're just making up some crazy stuff when you're teaching this. It's a story that made a whole lot of sense. Use a lot of familiar language with the people in that region. So Jesus had to get in a boat because there were so many people there that were trying to learn from him. If you know anything about the book of Mark, often in the book of Mark, you'll see as Jesus does things, it says that people are astonished because he teaches with authority. So Jesus is not like the other rabbis. He's not like another teacher. He is the Son of God teaching with real authority. And so that's kind of drawing people to himself as an authority figure and teacher. And so very crowded. He's in the cove. He's in a boat. He sits down in a boat. Very common for teachers to do. And I would show you a picture of this area if I could. And you could just go ahead and Google that at some point, right? The Cove of the Sower. And you'll get images of what it looks like and maybe help you understand the story even more. So verse 2. And it says that he taught many things by parables and said, listen, a farmer went out to sow his seed. And that he was scattering the seed. Some fell along the path, and birds ate it up. Some fell on the rocky places where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly, but the soil was shallow. And then the sun came up, and the plants were scorched, and they withered because they had no root. And other seeds fell among the thorns, which grew up and choked the plants, and so they did not bear any grain. So there's Jesus teaching in a cove, on a boat, tells his story again. And we get to really understand kind of where he's getting at, because lucky for us, right, this is the one parable that Jesus actually, well, he does a couple, but this is one of the few parables that Jesus actually explains the meaning behind it. And so we're going to get into that a little bit. But just one of my first observations, I think, when we read this to take note of is that when we look at this story, we can see that, I guess the main observation at first is that the point of a seed is to be planted, then to grow and bear fruit. So a farmer during this time would often maybe wear like a satchel or like a big bag over his shoulder, or they'd carry a big bucket, and they wouldn't just, grab seed and then just like as a clump and drop it down. They would, or they wouldn't even really grab it or hit them with this. They would grab it and they would start to sow it like this and throw it, almost like a sprinkler head. Like they would just grab a handful and they would just toss it the best they could to cover up as much ground as they could. It wasn't one seed plant is a handful of seed, and they're just scattering it the best as they can. And then just like a little sprinkler head. And they would often do this just because they try to get their crops growing, and they would typically prepare their field to receive the seed. And I would say that mostly the seed would land on the good soil because that's where it's supposed to grow. The key thing, though, is to remember here that the point of sowing a seed or planting a seed is that it is intended to grow up into something. It's not just throwing seed in the hopes that it stays a seed forever. That's silly. That's a waste of time for the farmer. It's a waste of money. It's a waste of everything. It's not sowing seed so it'll stay a seed. It's sowing seed so that the point would be that seed would grow and bear fruit. And we might be wondering now, what the heck does this have to do with me? Cool, a farmer sowed seed along the, in his field, and yeah, some didn't land exactly where it was supposed to, but that's no big deal. That, it's just seed that doesn't bear any fruit. Well, the point of the seed is to bear fruit, but we get to see that Jesus tells us in Mark 4:13-14 that the point of the word or the seed is, in fact, that it is the word. He says in verse 13, Jesus said to them, "Don't you understand this parable? Well, how then will you understand any parable?" Thanks, Jesus. Verse 14 says, "The farmer sows the word." So we get to understand here that when it talks about the farmer sowing the seed, that is in fact the word, that the seed represents the word, that the word being the truth of who God is and what he's done for us, the gospel truth that Jesus, his life and death and resurrection, that the hope of the world, that sinners like you and me, that we can be made new again, that we can find forgiveness and peace with God. That is the word that's being sown, and that is the seed that is meant to grow and produce fruit, to produce life change, for us to become more like Jesus when we receive that word, when we understand the gospel, that it changes our heart, which then leads to changing the way that we live our lives. It changes the way we think about people. It changes the way that we interact with people. It changes our affections, that we channel them towards the Lord and we worship Him with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength. So the point of a seed is to grow and bear fruit. And the word is that seed. And we see that the second observation would be this, right? That not all soil is good soil. So we have some soil that's rock, some soil that's the road, some soil that's thorny of some sort. And all of that would show us that there is more than just good soil, but there is in fact bad soil where that seed cannot grow and cannot bear fruit and cannot accomplish its purpose. Because if you look at verse 4, it says, as he was scattering seed, that some of it fell along the path and that birds ate it up. And so this is describing a different people here. And so this particular verse is talking about a person that has kind of a shut mind. Someone who's not really there to listen. You probably experienced that before, right? Where you were trying to explain something to someone, but they're really just waiting for you to finish so that they can say their piece. They really don't care at all what you have to say. They're not listening to you. They're hearing you, but not listening to you. And they're just ready to say what's already on their mind because their mind is already made up. This is someone whose heart is hard towards the things of God, and they aren't really open to receiving the word. That there's nowhere for the seeds to really take root and grow. And I know that I've found myself in the place like that and found myself to be that way at times where I'll go into something with a closed mind and I'm being stubborn and prideful. And I'll say that the heart that is closed is the heart that is prideful. Because why would you need God? And I dealt with that for a lot of times before I was a Christian and even as a Christian, right? Where I'm just so prideful that I don't really care what the Lord has to say about it. I've already made up my mind. So maybe we've made decisions like that, right? Big decisions, small decisions, where it's like, why would I seek after the Lord? I'm just going to do it. It's whatever I want to do. And we get taught that in our culture, right? It's all about me, 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 me. Let me do what I want to do. And I'll tell you that is not good soil. That is soil that is going to, the seed's going to land, and then it's going to be eaten up and not take root, not grow, not bear fruit. Look at verse 5. It says that some seed fell on the rocky places where it did not have much soil, and it sprang up quickly. It grew a little bit because that soil was shallow. But when the sun came up, the plants were scorched and they withered because they had no root. Now, this is the type of person that Jesus actually talks about a lot, and he uses several different parables to describe this person. They are the person who doesn't count the cost before they do something, which is a parable we'll get to do and talk about and dive into later this summer. They're the ones who jump the gun and don't really think it through. They're the person who builds their house on the sand and then the waves come and then it collapses, which is another parable that Jesus tells. Jesus explains later that this is the person who their reception of the word only lasts a brief moment because when things get tough, they decide that Jesus really isn't for them. They don't realize what they signed up for. They are the people who really aren't all in. Francis Chan has a great chapter in his book, Crazy Love, that was so popular 10, 12 years ago. It's called The Profile of the Lukewarm, and it talks about lukewarm people, and he has several different descriptions of people who maybe they're not all in, they're not all out, they just think they can straddle the fence, and Jesus is like, nah, I either have all of you or none. And Francis Chan says, lukewarm people don't really want to be saved from their sin, they only want to be saved from the penalty of their sin, so they don't want to go to hell, but they really don't want to live a life of holiness and pursuing Christ. But it doesn't work that way, that the life of being a Christ follower means that we pursue him the rest of our lives at all times. And yeah, we stumble, but we get back up and we keep pushing forward. Verse 7. It says, other seed fell among the thorns, which grew up and choked the plants, and they did not bear grain. So this one is really the one that I think just screams American culture here. So it falls among the thorns, which grew up, choked the plants, and they didn't bear any fruit. Jesus explains in verses 18 and 19, just a couple verses down, as he describes this parable, he says that these people are the ones who receive the word, they hear the word, but then the worries of this life, the deceitfulness of wealth, and the desires for other things really, come up, and they come in and they choke the word and they make it unfruitful. The worries of this life, the deceitfulness of wealth, and the desires of other things. Worry, greed, idolatry. That's the American life, right? Feels like everywhere you look, we're just so worried about everything under the sun. Everything. We're worried about everything. Whether that's politics, our family, our job, money, a pandemic. I mean, I think that's even right what the news is built on, it feels like, is that what gets views, what gets clicks, well, it's bad news. That's why sometimes if you turn the news on, it's so disheartening. And I thought Pastor Tim has given us such wise words that if you just stress out about watching the news and turn it off, it's not going to be healthy for you. Pastor Tim even led us through a series a while back called Anxious for Nothing, where we talked about how to set our mind on things above and not be anxious for anything. Teaches us really not to get caught up in the what if this, what if this, what if this, what if this, and you kind of just like a truck that's stuck in snow, right? Or just spinning and spinning and spinning, and then you just go so worry. It's like an American staple right now, right? Or greed. When money rules over you and it keeps you in bondage, and the love of money is a dangerous thing. I think we all know that. Or even idolatry, the desires of other things. It's sneaky. We certainly don't worship statues. I don't think anyone has like a secret shrine in their closet that they like to go to and worship and bow down to. When we typically think of idolatry, like, oh, I'm worshiping an idol. But I think that idolatry can play itself out, not in those bad things like that, but often for people in the church, it's good things. That we start to elevate the good things above God, and we put the creation above the Creator in our heart. And those things choke the word and stop it from accomplishing its purpose to grow and bear fruit. See, the thing is, all of these soils, these people, they all received the word. All these people heard the same thing. Jesus didn't take the good soil and teach them one thing and all the bad soil and teach them another thing. There's a fair opportunity for everyone to hear the same thing. But not all of them were able to bear the same fruit. And so what does that mean for us? Well, I think our job is twofold. I think one, that we as people have to prepare our field to receive the word. That we have to remove the rocks and burn away the thorns that are in our lives that are stopping the word from accomplishing its purpose of growing and bearing fruit and changing the way that we live our lives. So, question for myself and for you, couple, what is distracting you and stealing your attention and affection? What is distracting you and stealing your attention and affection? And be careful. I think it sometimes can be good things, not bad things. That could be worry, greed, idolatry. It could be your kids. It could be your job. It could be whatever. But what is stealing your attention and affection? I don't know what that is for you. I know what it is for me. But I think, if I ask that question, I think probably something comes to your mind and your heart. And I would encourage you, just tell someone, find freedom in community. Talk about it, pray about it, bring it to the Lord. Say, hey, I'm going to cast all my anxieties on you because you care for me, Lord, as it says in 1 Peter 5. So I think that's what we got to do there. That's one thing, right, is that we got to prepare our field to receive the word for us. And I think the second is that we sow the word regardless of the soil. So we just learned, right, about our one and what that means, that Jesus shows that he's willing to pursue the one and leave the 99 so that there can be repentance and celebration in heaven, and that we're called to do the same thing. And we're pursuing our one and praying about how we can reach out to this person in our lives who doesn't know the Lord, and our job as a church is to reach them. And so we learned about our one, and Jesus, he did not wait for us to get our act together, to become good soil before he saved us. And so we don't wait for people to get their act together before we reach out for them and reach out to them. That we sow seed, we share the word, we tell the world the truth of who God is and what he's done for us through the cross and resurrection. Now we do that regardless of the soil, regardless of what they look like, regardless of their life experience, that we have a responsibility to sow the word. And we don't wait for people to figure it out. Hey, he's kind of tough to deal with. He's got an anger issue. I'm going to wait till he kind of takes care of that. Then I'm going to invite him to church. Then I'm going to bring him, the good news of Jesus and tell him what Jesus has done for him. Then, once he figures it out and becomes good soil, then I'll do it. No, I don't know who good soil is. I'll tell you right now, I get to teach the students every weekend. I know that I am not teaching to a bunch of high schoolers who are good soil. I know that. But my job isn't to figure out who's good soil and who's not. My job is to sow the word. And that's what we're called to do as followers of Jesus, that we sow the word so that it can grow up and accomplish its purpose to produce fruit and life change. We have the gospel message that brings hope and life, and we have a responsibility to share it with every person. And I don't know what soil that might be, but they deserve to hear. Jesus said, those who have ears, let them hear. So, we prepare our own field, and we sow regardless of the soil. Let's pray together. God, thank you so much for your word, the word that we were able to receive and experience the life-changing power of Jesus. That word that brought us hope, that we were lost and gone astray, but you brought us home to you. I pray, God, that we would prepare our own field. We would prepare our own soil so that we could receive the word from you, the truth of who you are, the truth that's found in Scripture. And I pray, God, for us to just pursue after our one with everything, because that is what you did for us. So would you be honored and glorified and magnified in the way that we live and the things that we do. We love you in Jesus' name. Amen. Love you, New Hope Church family. We'll see you this Thursday for our next TNT devotional. We'll see you then.